Oh, yes, we're now live, Chair.
Okay. Any apologies, Alison?
Chair, we haven't got any apologies. We are expecting Councillor Robotham, but if she doesn't arrive, then Councillor Wardle can substitute, so the meeting is quorate.
Thank you. Okay. Declarations of interest? None received. We'll exclude the press and public from item 7 for items 8, 9, 10 and 11, I think. Is that right? Yeah. Thank you, Alison.
Yes, Chair.
I've no urgent business, although I understand 9 and 10 have reversed.
That's correct, Chair.
See, I read all my notes that you send me. Okay. Minutes. Will somebody who was present last time agree they're a correct record? Yes, thank you. Is there any matters arising that aren't being dealt with? No, thank you. Right. Update on the Public Works Lending Board, including terms. Michelle Ashworth. Michelle, I've had this 3 times already.
Sorry about that, Chair. Just
That's
one
all
more
right.
time to go. Yes, so this report's to update members of the subcommittee on the outcome of the Public Works Loan Board lending terms consultation announced in November and the implications for the Property Growth Fund going forwards. Just a quick summary of the background. Members may know that there's been lots of local authority activity in the commercial property market in recent years. A recent National Audit Office report estimates local authorities have spent 6.6 billion on commercial property between 2016-17 and 2018-19, which was over 14 times more than in the previous 3 years, primarily for yield and largely financed by prudential borrowing. In 2018, MHCLG tried to address this by issuing statutory guidance, including a requirement for a capital investment strategy, the production of quantitative indicators, and reiterating the restriction on borrowing in advance of need. This didn't appear to address the issue as borrowing increased as interest rates fell across the board, particularly in the summer of 2019 when 500 million was borrowed in a single day. Borrowing was heading towards the statutory limit. And so in October 2019, Her Majesty Treasury announced an immediate 1% PWLB rate rise to slow things down. The National Audit Office issued their report in February 2020, highlighting the issues around authorities using low-cost loans from PWLB to buy investment property, primarily for rental income. The Treasury's consultation on proposed PWLB future lending terms was issued in March of last year. CITFA responded for Chief Finance Officers to abide by that with immediate effect. And that consultation ended in July of last year, and we fed into that process. The outcome of the consultation was published and implemented in November 2020 with immediate effect, and an immediate interest rate cut of 1% was implemented at that point to take rates back to the pre-October 2019 levels. So the key change to those lending terms is to require authorities that wish to borrow from the PWLB to confirm that they do not plan to buy investment assets primarily for yield. This has a number of implications for local authorities. Authorities must provide their high-level capital programme to MHCLG annually. Authorities must provide assurance from their Section 151 officer that they will not borrow in advance of need and that the authority has no intention to buy commercial assets primarily for yield. There will be no access to new PWLB loans in a financial year if an authority has commercial for yield assets anywhere in its capital programme. This applies to local authority owned companies and joint ventures, and breaches could potentially result in repayment of loans on demand plus early repayment penalties. So there are a number of things that are allowable for PWLB borrowing and things that aren't allowable, and those are set out in the report. So allowable things are your usual council service spending, education, transport, etc., etc. Housing is allowable for borrowing. refinancing is allowable, and regeneration, which will be a key category for us going forward. Not allowable is anything which would be classed as an investment asset, but primarily for yield. If we have anything of that nature in our capital programme, we will not be able to borrow from PWLB. Definitions will be key in assessing this. As I said, regeneration and investment assets, but primarily for yield, are important definitions. Regeneration schemes are characterised by one or more of the following characteristics. So something that is addressing an economic or social market failure by providing services, facilities or other amenities that are of value to local people and would not otherwise be provided by the private sector. Preventing a negative outcome, including buying or conserving assets of community value. Involving or generating significant additional activity, and that additionality is very important in this definition. Something that would not otherwise happen, creating jobs and social or economic value, or something where rents are recycled within the project or applied to related projects with similar objectives rather than just being applied to wider services. So in terms of the definition of investment assets bought primarily for yield, this would be something where we would be buying land or existing buildings to let out at a market rate, or land and buildings which were previously operated on a commercial basis, and then we continue that activity without any additional investment or modification. Or buying land or existing buildings other than housing which generate income, and we intend to hold that indefinitely rather than achieving some more meaningful trigger such as land assembly. So what does this mean for the Property Growth Fund? It's important to note this isn't intended to apply retrospectively, so any past commercial assets that we've acquired will not be taken into account. However, it's true that many of our past investments have had a regeneration aim. What we need to do is to ensure that our capital programme reflects our regeneration aims via investments and does not preclude us from borrowing from PWLB. In terms of the current capital programme, the aims of the Property Growth Fund will be amended via the Period 8 Finance Update report, which is going to Cabinet this evening, to reflect the Council's regeneration priorities, with financial return being a secondary aim in order to cover costs of investment and prudently provide for future fluctuations in income and whole life costs of the assets acquired. This will also be reflected in the proposed capital programme and capital investment and disposal strategy to be considered at Budget Council. All future PGF investments will need to be made in accordance with the allowable capital spend categories outlined earlier, if the council is to continue to be able to access PWLB borrowing. And just to put that into perspective, the proposed capital programme for the next 5 years is supported by 106 million of prudential borrowing. So these are significant figures that we're talking about. So those are the key points from the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, I've no questions because this is the third, or is it the fourth time I've been briefed on this. Anybody got any questions?
I've got a brief question, Leader, if that's okay. It's a question stroke comment. I mean, I think the first thing to note really is that this doesn't impact on our current capital programme at all. So it's not going to stop us doing anything that we want to do. I think that's really important to recognise. The other thing I'd like us to give some thought to, though, is whether we need to start to build up an investment fund that is drawn from capital receipts. So if we ever do get to a position when there is something that we absolutely need to do that we cannot justify under these new regulations, we can still go ahead and do it. Now, it might be that over time I've become more relaxed about whether that will ever happen. But I think what, as a council, we must do is do what we need to do for the benefit of the place. And if that means we have to fund it in a different way through capital receipts, then if it's the right thing to do, then that's what we ought to be prepared to consider doing.
Okay.
And then finally is the question really. Have we, in terms of what we're suggesting for terms of reference for this group, are we confident that we've got covered off land assembly? So we don't specifically mention it, but we do sort of say things that clearly imply land assembly.
Okay, well, on the first point you raised, I think you've given yourself a job to do. So you need to prepare a report to come to Cabinet with those things in. On land assembly, Michelle.
I think we'll have to just have a look at the detail of the terms of reference for the subcommittee, and just make sure that that is included going forward. I think the Chief Exec is right in that it is implied in those terms of reference, but if we can clarify that at all, then I think we should do so.
Yeah, because land assembly is one of our major roles in helping all sorts of development, isn't it? Okay, yeah. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, just a brief comment from me, please. It's just to say that we've been working together with finance, looking at our future capital expenditure and our pipeline of investment type projects. So we're obviously doing that in the light of this new guidance. So that obviously wraps up the future PGF allocations we've already got and the ones that will be going to full council for further approval. So just to make that statement. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, those will be reflected in the minutes. Anybody else? If not, can we thank Michelle?
Chair, can I just make a quick comment?
I don't know why Barnsley supporters are interfering in my business, but go on.
So sorry about that. Obviously, Steve's made an important point in relation to, any areas that might need to fall out with, the PWLB funding route. Obviously, capital receipts is only one route we could choose in relation to, funding such, projects in the future. There are, as Steve well knows, methods of funding projects that don't require, borrowing from PWLB. So we could also go down that route as well. But that would be for us to, considering the circumstances at the time, really, in order to facilitate, whatever we felt we wanted to progress. Okay,
I'm sure this will all be in the report that you and Mr. Rumble are writing for a cabinet meeting in the future. If there's nothing else,